Hi, everyone. Welcome to tonight's episode of the Egg Whisperer Show. We're in a different spot tonight. I'm not in the studio. I'm actually here in my office, and I've been working since really early this morning. I started my first retrieval at 5:30 in the morning. I did 2 egg retrievals, and I headed over to a radio station, a studio in Berkeley to join NPR 1A. And if you guys missed that show, you can find the link on my Facebook page and listen to it. It was a live show all about egg freezing, and I had a blast doing it. A lot of callers called in for the show. They had some recorded comments during the show. And of course, if you know me, I was just hoping that I could chime in, but there were a lot of things said that I couldn't chime in on. But you know what? That's life. So for those of you who don't know me, some people call me the Egg Whisperer, but that was really a gift that a patient gave me. And I have done egg freezing parties, and I continue to do them. And at these parties, we basically talk about fertility because that's just what I love to talk about from the minute I wake up until I wake up again. And sometimes I wonder if I should even leave my office to go home and change and come back because I love what I do so much. So thank you guys for joining. The phone number is up there if you guys want to call. We have some callers that are already have already registered to call in, so I don't miss their questions. So feel free to call still. There's still room in the schedule for tonight's show for you to call me. And I do these shows because I see so many women, men, people, and they come in and see me not knowing that there are basic fertility tests that you can do. We all know how complex life is. We all know how complex medicine is. But we can make fertility screening a very simple thing for people to get done. So what I announced last Friday at the Illuminations 2018 Gala, and I'll do it again tonight, is the TUSHY method. And if you're watching this, I know there's a few of you out there, you're probably giggling and you're like, what the heck is she talking about? Has she lost her mind? And the answer is, no, I haven't lost my mind at all. I just want people to know that there are screening tests that you can do to test your fertility. It's really as simple as that. So I designed the TUSHY method, and T stands for tubes or fallopian tubes. U is for uterus or ultrasound of the uterus. S is for sperm, which is a semen analysis. H is for hormones, and Y is for your genetic profile. So you don't have to be confused about what are the steps to fertility screening. Fertility screening certainly can be a blood test, AMH hormone, which can kind of tell you when you might be running out of eggs. But then if you want to get a full picture, a full look at your TUSHY, now you know that you can do that. And these are the kinds of tests that fertility doctors like me coordinate for their patients. So to get your tests, I almost said testicles, to get your tubes checked, you do a hysterosalpingogram. And that's this test that people say is horrific and like the worst pain ever. But with me, it's not, because I offer all my patients pain meds, Valium and Tylenol with codeine 30 minutes before. And then the experience is not as awful and horrible as what you read online or hear from your friends. So that test will tell you if the embryo transport system is working. And so for those of you who don't know, egg and sperm cells meet in the fallopian tube, and that embryo travels down the fallopian tube until it lands in the uterus. So if a fallopian tube is blocked, it's really hard to get pregnant naturally. Certainly there are reasons why a fallopian tube is blocked. And if you know me, when you know about personalized fertility care and personalized fertility medicine, you know that I believe in the Egg Whisperer way is diagnosis before treatment. So if you know what your diagnosis is and why you're doing what you're doing, well, guess what? Sometimes you might get pregnant on your own at home if you can fix things. But if you didn't have the TUSHY done and you didn't know what your diagnosis was and you're going right into treatment, how the heck are you supposed to be able to get pregnant at home in the bedroom where it's way more fun, way more romantic? But believe it or not, I do understand that getting pregnant at home isn't the way it looks on these telenovelas, although that's quite sexy and romantic and way hotter than what really goes on. But I want to decrease the time to pregnancy. I want to decrease the time for folks to do treatments that don't work, and increase people's time where they can enjoy pregnancy, move on with their lives, and hopefully have more babies. So the easiest way to schedule the tube test is by asking your doctor to send you to an imaging center, and that's where these tests are done. So now for the U, to just get really technical, it's a pelvic ultrasound, which is a wand, and I wish it was a magic wand. So I could say you will be pregnant without my help, but I don't have that type of a magic wand because I'm just a medical doctor, and that's all I do, is give people a diagnosis, and then hopefully the best plan for a future pregnancy. So when we take an ultrasound probe and put it inside the vagina, what we're looking at is the size of the uterus, the tilt of the uterus, any fibroids, polyps, anything blocking the ability of an embryo to implant. And we're also looking at the ovaries, and most especially for me, I'm looking at the antral follicle count. So that's a count of the number of follicles that are in the ovaries, and that's also a diagnostic tool so that I can give a patient a really good idea as to where she is on a fertility meter. So now for the S in sperm health. So we used to say things, not this fertility doctor, that it doesn't matter what the sperm looks like, just as long as you have sperm, just do IVF and everything's going to be okay. Well, that's kind of old way of thinking, and the new way is a much more progressive way of thinking because we have a lot more science behind this, and that is that sperm health actually does matter. I just think of a little sperm cell with a barbell, lifting it up, and I tell my male patients, look, you got to put your sperm through a sperm fitness challenge, and it's very likely, if you're a patient of mine, men are going to be doing hormone tests, they're going to be taking supplements, they're going to see a male fertility specialist who's going to check under the hood and see if there's a varicocele or not, and we're going to do everything possible to improve your sperm counts. And sometimes guys are scared, like, oh my gosh, what if you find out something's wrong? Well, unlike women, where we all run out of eggs, and that's totally normal, and sadly it happens when a lot of us haven't finished having our families, for men, if there's a sperm issue, oftentimes there are things that we can do to help guys regenerate and make more sperm, better sperm, faster swimmers, and there are techniques that we can use, for example, ICSI, PICSI, as well as sperm aspiration to make those eggs progress as embryos during an IVF procedure. So lots of stuff to learn about in the TUSHY method. I'm only on the TUS. I'm going to get to the H part. So now we're going to talk about the TUSH, and soon I'll get to the E. I won't show you my TUSHY. So the H part are all the hormones. So typically the hormones that we do are the FSH, estradiol, and AMH tests. And then certainly I also do things like thyroid, prolactin, vitamin D, and there's a whole preconception panel as well, looking at your blood type, looking at your blood count, making sure you're not anemic, as well as making sure you're immune to things like German measles, chicken pox. The time to find out that you're not immune is not when you have chicken pox in pregnancy, because that's a really, really scary time, because that could be detrimental to the fetal health. So we want to make sure that folks know these things, get these things done ahead of a planned pregnancy. And the Egg Whisperer way is to plan a pregnancy and not jump off the plane feet first, not knowing where you're going. We all want to take a course on exactly what to expect during that scary flight. And pregnancy can sometimes be a scary flight for people, and certainly you want to know everything possible before you get on the plane. I hope that analogy makes sense. And then for your reproductive genetic profile, basically that can include anything from extended carrier screening, like looking at things, for example, cystic fibrosis, Fragile X carrier status, spinal muscular atrophy carrier status, as well as a cancer screen to see if you're at risk for having breast cancer or ovarian cancer later in life. And the reason why that kind of stuff's important to me is because I'm friends with lots of my patients. These are long-term relationships, and I want my patients to be around for a really, really long time. And I would never want anyone to say, oh, Amy, you missed the opportunity for me to have diagnosed cancer early because I could have done this test. No one wants to be diagnosed with infertility before they've run out of eggs. No one wants to be diagnosed with cancer before it's too late also. And so when I have an opportunity to plan someone's future family, I'm also thinking long term. And if you have one of those high-risk genes, there are certainly things that you can do now as a preventative measure. And we can also test embryos for those genes through a technology called PGD. And that's where you do IVF and you test an embryo for a gene before you transfer it. So that's basically the TUSHY method. Tell all your friends, everyone who's watching here, tell your OBGYN, tell them to look up this method online. It's a really easy process and method, and we all do it anyways, but I just thought, coming up with a silly old acronym or mnemonic I should look up the definition of both those things. And I think that it's a pretty simple way of making something that can be very daunting a little bit more easier to understand. So that's kind of why I'm hoping that what I'm hoping will come out of the TUSHY method. And I know it's silly, but I don't care. If it's easy to recognize and it'll help more people and prevent infertility and get one person to do no cycles of IVF, or one person prevent them from going through treatment unnecessarily, for example, taking Clomid for a whole year before finding out that their fallopian tubes are blocked, well, I would say that the TUSHY method has served its purpose. So I'm going to take over and take a look over here. I'm talking to my producer, Paula. Hi, Paula. How are you tonight?
Hey, guys. I'm good.
Okay.
Good to be here. We
Awesome.
have a caller.
Excellent.
Hello, caller.
Hello.
Awesome. Hi, caller. Can you please share your name with me?
Shannon?
Hi, Shannon. Thanks for calling tonight. I know that you probably have some questions, so why don't you just tell me a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Victoria. First of all, I wanted to thank you for your time. A little bit of my background. I am over 44 years old and froze my eggs 6 years ago. I am now thinking about tying my eggs and have a few questions about the process.
Okay, so Shannon, so you're 44 years old for the listeners. You froze your eggs how many years ago?
6 years ago.
6 years ago. Wow, you're on top of it. That's impressive. And how many eggs were frozen?
12.
12 eggs. Excellent. Excellent. Okay, and so now you're considering thawing your eggs. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, good. And so what questions do you have for me tonight?
Actually, if I basically thaw my frozen eggs and convert them to frozen embryos, what is the typical time for keeping frozen embryos that are made out of frozen eggs?
Got it. So your question is, if I thaw my eggs and make them into embryos, how long can I keep them as frozen embryos? And what I tell people is, there's no such thing as embryo freeze or burn. So those embryos can sit in the freezer as long as human beings exist who can actually thaw them. And so we heard very recently, I think it was end of 2017, about this really incredible story about a woman who used an embryo that was older than her that was donated. I think it was something like 26 years old that had been frozen. So we at least know that embryos can be frozen for at least 26 years. And before that, the oldest embryo was 22 years old. So that should give people comfort in knowing that as long as an embryo is being safely stored, and I know we've heard of a couple of really heartbreaking, heart-wrenching stories, but assuming that everything goes well with the freezing and storage of your embryos, there should be no reason to believe that you'll have any issues thawing and transferring, let's say 5 years from now, 10 years from now, for baby number 2 or 3 or even 4, if that's what you want.
Oh, great. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. What other questions do you have? Is there anything else I can answer for you tonight?
Yes, sure. Also, if AMH test result is very low,
okay.
Is IVF recommended with such a low egg reserve, or egg time is the best option?
Got it. So I think what you're asking is at 44, if your egg reserves or fertility levels indicate that your chances of pregnancy are really low, should you try for a fresh cycle now, or should you consider using your frozen eggs? And my answer is, I would use your frozen eggs first. And then certainly you can still consider doing fertility treatment, because we know that frozen eggs are a chance for pregnancy. But what I'm hoping is that because you froze 6 years ago and you froze 12 eggs, that your chances will be quite good. And when I say quite good, I'm thinking that your chances will be probably over 35% of having at least one live birth from that batch of 12 eggs, versus, let's say, 2% from an IVF cycle at 44 with a low AMH. So certainly everyone isn't a number. I don't think of my patients as coming in with a number on their forehead saying AMH of 0.2 or 0.3 or an age of 44. I think of everyone as a fertile person when they come in and meet with me, but certainly these diagnostic tools are just that. They're just tools to guide us about what your fertility chances are. But yeah, I do think that thawing your eggs from 6 years ago is a really good idea versus spending time, energy, and money on cycles right now. So one strategy that I use for patients, and one thing you can consider if you're still considering a fresh cycle, is you can still do a fresh cycle, but perhaps thaw your eggs on the same day as your egg retrieval so that you're injecting all at once. And then financially speaking, the cost would be less. Rather than doing two sets of ICSI, you can just do one set on all the eggs together, and then you can test them all at the same time as well. So that's one strategy that you can use potentially if you're still interested in doing a fresh cycle now. I hope that answer helps. What other questions can I answer for you?
Oh, sure. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And based on your experience, is age 45 for women the latest age to conduct IVF?
Yeah, I mean, my oldest live birth for a patient who used her own eggs is 46. I've had patients 47, 48, 49, even 50 that I've helped with treatment. But what I would say is I've actually helped them with IVF, going through the procedure of IVF, but I wasn't able to help them become parents with their own eggs. So when I take a look at someone's fertility story, I look at everything. I look at their age, I look at their levels, and then I give them an idea based on my experience. And I have a lot of experience with patients over the age of 43. And then I can tell them, look, based on your levels, based on your numbers, I think it's worth it to consider trying. Or I'd say, you know what, I think that you're better off not trying. But at the end of the day, if someone wants to try and someone wants to be given, let's say, a 1 or 2% chance, my philosophy is, who am I to say no? As long as you know what your chances are and you are going into it understanding that really the experience is just so you can learn more about your body, then I'm totally fine taking someone through a cycle. But I would never take someone through a cycle for a 1 to 2% chance with them expecting it to work. So I think that it's really important for people to know what their levels are, what their diagnosis is, what their chances are before they do any treatment. And then the other thing about your eggs is, I'm just making an assumption, but I could be wrong. You could be married to a 24-year-old guy, and that would be awesome regardless. I mean, I'm just making an assumption that your husband's probably around the same age as you. Is that correct?
That's right.
Right. And so what I tell people, and I've actually done sperm, excuse me, I just spit on myself. That was awesome. I actually do sperm freezing parties, believe it or not. I know that kind of sounds really weird. And no, people do not freeze their sperm at these parties. So what I do at these parties, I educate people about the importance of making sure the sperm has been tested, that the male partner or sperm donor, the quality is excellent before you thaw your precious eggs, because we only get one chance with your eggs, right? So you have 12 from 6 years ago. You want to make sure that everything about the sperm has been checked. You can do DNA fragmentation testing. You can do epigenetic testing, testosterone testing. Have your husband see even a male fertility specialist just to chime in and make sure that everything is excellent about the sperm health before you thaw your eggs.
Is there any special test that we should run on this, my husband's sperm before?
Absolutely. Yep, I'll tell you my routine. So I have a hocus pocus supplement list. I think, well, it's not hocus pocus. So I talk about my magic wand, which is my probe, and my hocus pocus supplements, but there is a little bit of science behind it. So just like women take prenatal vitamins, I strongly believe that men should be taking prenatal vitamins as well. So my male prenatal supplement list includes vitamin D, fish oil, CoQ10, and then an antioxidant supplement blend. If the antioxidant supplement blend is too expensive, and certainly these things can add up cost-wise, just taking vitamin C 1,000 milligrams and zinc 75 milligrams on top of what I just mentioned may, help with the sperm tremendously. And also high-dose L-carnitine. So there's a brand called Proxeed, PROXEED+.com. So that's a website, and I have no, what's the word I'm trying to use? There's no incentive for me to call out any companies or their brands or anything like that. But just look at the ingredients there and then see if you can get something like that. And then for guys, making sure that they have a normal BMI, so their body size is normal. If they have any medical problems, making sure that they're well controlled. For example, if a guy has diabetes, making sure his hemoglobin A1C is normal. If his blood pressure is high, make sure it's well managed. So those things are really, really important. And then looking at his testosterone levels, if his semen analysis is low or has low count, low motility. And the advanced sperm tests that he can do are looking at the DNA fragmentation, as well as epigenetic changes in the sperm. And so the DNA fragmentation test I do through ReproSource, And then that's a do-it-yourself test where they ship you a kit from home, and then he collects the sample and then ships it back. And then the Episona test, episona.com is the website. That test is done from home. It's a kit. You put it in the mailbox. Literally, it's not temperature sensitive, and that gets sent off, and you get results about embryo progression, if there are any issues with fertilization of the sperm. And so you're really doing a deep dive into sperm health before, like I said, you thaw your one-time only chance at using those precious eggs. So it's just important to just do all that stuff. If you've been waiting, as long as you've been waiting to use your eggs, you might as well wait a sperm life cycle, which is 2 to 3 months, to get the sperm in tip-top shape, and then retest. So let's say you had an abnormal DNA fragmentation, wait the time, retest, making sure it's normal again before you use your husband's sperm. I hope that helps, Shannon. Do you have any other questions? I'm happy to answer any other ones if you have them.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
So it looks like it is recommended not to transfer frozen eggs to another center. What are the risks of transferring eggs?
Right. So your question is, if you have frozen eggs one place, why can't you move them to another place? Or should you consider moving them? So this is what I tell people. Look, if you had this really intricate cake made and it was frozen just for you, you're not going to move it across the country, because what if the person who received the cake didn't know all the steps of thawing the cake, setting it up right? So certainly there's a process of freezing eggs. It's called vitrification. And then there's a recipe we follow to thaw the eggs. But no two labs are alike, just like no two eggs are alike, no two people are alike. So it's it's very tricky to thaw eggs in exactly the same way that someone else thawed them. There's so many different kits. There's so many different types of media. So that's the fluid that embryologists use. So if, let's say, you move the eggs and the eggs didn't survive, the first reason could be because you moved the eggs. It has nothing to do with the strength of the lab that you moved them to. The only time I would move eggs is if I know for a fact that that embryology lab has really good experience with that technology, and the embryologist feels really secure and good about accepting the eggs and thawing them. So in the Bay Area, we have a lot of embryologists that, for example, move around from lab to lab. So I'll have a patient who, let's say, froze her eggs at one lab, and she wants to move her eggs, and guess what? It's the same embryologist that froze her eggs who's now at the new lab. So there are situations that I definitely do. Sorry, I just had to take a drink of water. There are situations where I definitely do have patients move embryos or eggs, and it's in those types of cases. That's a really good question, and these are really important things that anyone who's frozen their eggs should really think through. And so I'm glad you're asking them. Is there any other question I can answer, Shannon?
Actually, about just transferring eggs again.
Yes.
So are there any arrangements between the lab can be made to make sure that transferring eggs can be done properly, or tying the eggs can be done properly, or it's very sensitive?
Yeah, so absolutely. So there's a very, so for me, I have a system in place, okay? So my system in place to move embryos are, I look at the embryology reports, I look at the strength and quality of the embryos, I look at the protocol used, I look at the workup done, and then I say, okay, I think that these embryos are strong enough to move, or these eggs are strong enough to move, okay? Then I talk to the lab director, I say, what do you think about this, okay? And then the lab director tells me, no, we don't have experience with this type of technique. I've never used this type of media. And so we use a company called Cryoport to move the eggs. And if, let's say, one lab doesn't have the ability to thaw, I have privileges at many different labs. So then I'll talk to other people in the Bay Area and say, hey, what's your experience with this technique? What's your experience with this protocol? Until I find someone that says, yes, oh, I'm very comfortable with this, and I will accept the eggs or embryos. So that's my protocol. And then we use Cryoport, which is a very reputable company, and they move eggs and embryos and sperm from lab to lab, and they've been doing it for a really long time.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's say I convert the frozen egg to frozen embryo.
Mm-hmm.
Is it as sensitive to transfer them to another clinic?
I would say it kind of depends on the strength of the embryo. It's the same thing. I would start that same process over again. I would look at the quality, look at the embryology paperwork, look at the technique used, and then do the same exact thing, asking folks, hey, what do you think about this protocol? Is this something that you can follow?
Mm-hmm. All right.
And then the other thing I'll bring up is, I don't know if you've ever heard me talking about the egg whisperer diet. So D stands for diagnosis, I is IVF, E is endometrial testing, and T is transfer. So you've done the D and the I already. So before you transfer, and I do this for all my patients, especially egg freezing patients, because like I said, it's not easy come, easy go. At this point, you can't go and get 12 eggs right now, so these eggs are so very precious. And so I would have you consider endometrial testing if you haven't already. So the ERA test and the Receptiva test are two tests that I do. I run my patients through a mock or rehearsal cycle first, where they take hormones to get their uterus ready as if we're going to transfer. But rather than transferring, we do a gentle biopsy in my office. I send the cells to 2 different labs. And then from there, we get results back that guide us on the right protocol to use, as well as the number of hours of progesterone that your body needs for a transfer to occur.
Right. That's interesting. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, Shannon. Any other questions at all for me tonight?
Yes. Actually, how can I evaluate the center that holds my frozen eggs for tying process?
Yeah, so the question is, how do you know if you basically have a good center that knows how to thaw your eggs? So there must be a good reason why you went there in the first place. They probably gained your trust. They have a lot of experience, I'm thinking. But the question that I have for you is, what I'm sensing is there's something about your center that you may not like right now. And what is that? What's making you question keeping them there?
Their success rate.
Okay. And so what kind of success rates are you comparing? So what I would say is, you're 44 years old now. You thought you froze your eggs 6 years ago. So the way I would think about your success rates is different, because you froze your eggs electively because you wanted to give yourself a future option for pregnancy that would have given you a higher rate for pregnancy than trying at, let's say, 44. So I don't know that you can compare your pregnancy rate with the pregnancy rate of what you're seeing on the IVF success rate charts for your lab. So I hope that helps. But I would certainly sit down with your doctor, obviously, and ask these same really, really good questions. I bet you have already. I'm sure it's just nice to hear them from somebody else. But I would do what we call here an IVF consult, and kind of review the protocol your doctor would use to transfer, discuss doing a mock cycle, talk about even doing a test like MyFertileOme. It's a fertility gene test to look at genes related to implantation before you transfer. You want to talk about all these things, and you're doing a really good job doing your due diligence before you transfer. So Shannon, thank you again for all these awesome questions. We're going to do another call-in show, so if you still have more questions, we'll have you back on the show another time. So I hope you have a great night. Thanks again, Shannon.
Thank you, Bert.
You're welcome. So we're going to take another caller now. Hi, caller. How are you?
Hi, Dr. Amy. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Oh, it's my pleasure. What's your name?
My name is Polly, and I'm 37 years old.
Okay.
My husband is 40.
Okay.
And we've been trying to conceive for about 3.5 years. We've gone through 4 failed IUI cycles, and so now we're considering IVF.
Okay. So what you're saying is, Polly, you're a 37-year-old woman trying for 3.5 years with your husband with 4 failed IUI cycles, thinking about IVF. I'm sorry you've been through so much. Whether it's 1 period or 36, more than 36 periods, that's way too many, and I'm sorry. But thank you for calling in tonight. I hope the information I'm going to give you is really helpful. So my first question is, what is the D? What is the diagnosis? What have you learned so far from all the cycles you've done?
Yeah, so we've, just to kind of back up, so I do have a history of thyroid cancer. I went through a total thyroidectomy about 4 years ago, but I've had my TSH levels tested, and my endocrinologist has said that everything looks normal.
That's good.
We've seen about 3 fertility specialists, and everybody says that everything looks good on paper.
Okay.
So it's unexplained at this point. I'm not 100% sure. I've tried to ask for a diagnosis, and I can't seem to get an answer.
Okay, so my theory on unexplained is no one actually took time to explain it. I know that sounds kind of like a jerk thing for me to say, but I think with all the scientific tools that we have nowadays, it's really hard to not find an explanation, especially, well, so let's break it down. First of all, what is your AMH level? Have you had that test done? It kind of tells us about how many eggs you have left in your egg bank.
I probably have had that test done. I don't recall what it is, and I'm honestly not 100% sure.
No problem. If it's a test that you haven't done in the last 6 months, I suggest doing it. I think it's a really good test that kind of gives you an idea as to how many eggs you would get in your IVF cycle. So the AFC, or antral follicle count, and the AMH together for me with the patient's age, they're all really good tools for me to be able to guide people up front as to how many eggs I expect, how many will be genetically normal, and then how many cycles I think people will need to do. This is the time for you to be greedy in that you want to be using 37-year-old eggs for all your kids in the future, because certainly I want you to be successful at 37, but I also want you to have the chance to have another baby at, let's say, 39 or 40. So you hear people talking over and over about egg freezing, egg freezing. Well, we need to do the same thing for couples like you who are 37, haven't had kids yet. We should be talking about freezing your embryos for future fertility. So tell me about the tube test. Did they do the hysterosalpingogram for you?
I know that they have tested the fallopian tube,
Okay.
and they couldn't find anything
Awesome.
that was blocking it.
Excellent.
And then I had polyps removed very shortly after that.
Okay.
And when we went in for IUI treatment, they were able to retrieve, or they were able to see eggs, and everything looked normal.
Great.
But for some reason, it just didn't work.
Okay. And then what about sperm quality, sperm morphology? Tell me about sperm health. Can you do that for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So my husband had his sperm tested about a couple of years ago, and it was low on motility. And so the specialist had advised that he take some vitamins, and when we went back for IUI, everything looked normal, and they were fine. Like the levels were okay.
Okay. So did you do another formal semen analysis after your IUI washes since the last one? So have you had a chance to do that yet?
No, and
Okay.
that's such a contentious
No problem. No problem.
debate between my husband and I.
Yeah.
I've been asking him to sort of do it, and I don't know if he's on the phone right now listening.
Okay.
But he wanted to wait until we started the IVF cycle.
Okay. Yeah.
If we had test them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we often sugarcoat sperm results, and I totally get it. We're all really sensitive human beings, and men are just as emotional as we are. Men want kids just like women do, and I find that the unexplained diagnosis is given so much to us when really there's a fertilization issue, and a lot of time it's sperm driven. So rather than spending the time saying, okay, I don't want, what I'm trying to say is, you know, now that it seems just from talking to you that this might be a fertilization issue that's sperm driven, it would be really important even before you did IVF to go through those steps that I mentioned earlier on tonight's show to get the sperm in the best shape ever, as far as supplements, making sure his BMI is normal. And I would get him in to see a male fertility specialist. My faves in the area are Dr. James Smith and Dr. Paul Turek, both in San Francisco. They'll do a thorough evaluation. Obviously, I start the process for my patients, but looking at the DNA fragmentation test, looking at epigenetic changes, because just doing IVF, certainly that can help with any fertilization issue, but you want to give your eggs the best chance of turning into really healthy embryos. You want to give yourself the best chance of being successful in your first cycle. And so doing those additional tests, while we as women are so used to being poked and prodded and guys aren't, I think it's important for your husband, and I'm just going to say this out loud, for him to be, squeezed, poked and prodded just a little bit so that you don't have to go through as much. Because I would hate for you to go through your first cycle and then learn, oh, we should have done Pixie. Oh, we should have done ICSI. Oh, he should have been on supplements for a while because the morphology was really bad. So the thinking of the past is that it just takes an egg and you can put anything in it and it's going to turn into a beautiful embryo. But that's an old way of thinking. We now know much more about sperm health and quality and how important it is, and how having high DNA fragmentation can increase your risk of miscarriages. And so you want to go into your IVF cycle making sure that you've done those kinds of tests.
Okay, that's perfect.
Awesome.
And in terms of improving chances, I know this is a loaded question, and I'm sorry if you've already covered this topic, but I quit drinking caffeine. I'm cutting down on sugar. I'm average weight. Are there any other alternative options? Like I've heard about Vitex, I've read about B-colon and acupuncture. Have you found any of that to help with IVF?
Yeah, absolutely. So having a healthy BMI is really important. Caffeine intake is totally okay, as well as alcohol in moderation, and sugar is not dangerous, but everything in moderation is what I recommend. I actually recently did an Egg Whisperer show talking about fertility foods and how to support fertility through your diet. So check out that show if you haven't already. I also have a Medium post that details everything I shared on that show, so you don't have to watch an entire show of me talking as well. So you can read my recommendations as well. But as far as supplements for women, I make my supplement recommendations and they're very individualized. But in general, just like I just rattled off all those supplements for men, like the L-carnitine, the vitamin D, the fish oil, CoQ10, and an antioxidant blend for men, for women, I think they should be on something very similar. So I'm not a big fan of bee pollen royal jelly. I really think that acai berry, CoQ10, those two I think are really helpful potentially in improving egg quality. I also think a really good multivitamin and fish oil, as well as probiotics, and making sure you have a normal vitamin D is really important for women. So that's my, that's my blend for most people. And then certainly in some women, I also add the recommendation of melatonin, DHEA, resveratrol, turmeric also on top of that. So if I see somebody and they have, let's say, less than a certain number of follicles on their ovaries, I'll add the recommendation of DHEA. Otherwise, I think for you, it sounds like assuming your AMH level was in the quote normal range, I think sticking to a really good prenatal with CoQ10, acai berry if you want, fish oil, probiotic, and vitamin D. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm going to say is all you need. That's a lot of stuff.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Polly. Absolutely. Thank you for calling tonight. We'll take the next caller. Hi, caller. This is Dr. Amy. You're calling in to Ask the Egg Whisperer. How are you tonight? Maybe the caller's asleep.
Yeah.
I was just talking too much. I don't blame you.
We have some.
I don't blame you, caller. Maybe I scared you away. Okay.
We know you've been on for a little bit. We'll
but thank you. We'll put you back on mute. We'll take the next caller now.
Hello.
Hi, caller.
I think she may be having trouble connecting.
Okay.
So let's try the other line that you just called in on. Just 1 second here.
Hello. We're having some technical difficulties. We're trying to link up to someone.
We see someone from
who's
overseas.
Calling us.
Let's just, we're going to unmute both your lines now if you want to try a very special guest here. Oh.
Hi, caller. We're trying to connect. We'd love to talk to you tonight.
Okay, just one more. Hello.
I think we got it.
Hi.
Hi, caller. What's your name?
I'm Nosheen.
Hi, Nosheen. Thank you for calling tonight. Really appreciate it. I'm happy to help here. What questions do you, well, I should start off with, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm calling from Mauritius.
Mauritius. That's a very beautiful island. What do you do in Mauritius?
Yes. I'm in the travel agency.
Got it. That would make perfect sense, because if I would want to go to somewhere right now at a drop of a hat, that's where I would want to go. Okay, so tell me, what's your fertility story tonight?
Most welcome. All right, so I had hysteroscopy done 3 weeks back.
I'm sorry, Nushin, you were breaking up. Can you say
result?
that again? Can you say that again? What did you have 3 weeks back?
A laparoscopy.
Okay. And then what did they find?
And the results were there was bowel adhesions, and at the bowel.
We're having a hard time connecting. Nushin, we're having a hard time connecting to you. I heard that you said that you had a laparoscopy with adhesions. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, go ahead. So tell me again. So you had a laparoscopy with adhesions, and then what else did they find?
And they found that the posterior surface of the uterus and the ovaries were covered with adhesions.
Okay.
So, like, there was only 30% access to the ovary.
Okay. And then what did they say about the fallopian tubes? Were the fallopian tubes open?
The tubes, he told me that the left tube was covered as well by the bowel adhesions.
Okay.
And the right tube was stuck down and distorted.
Got it. Okay. Did they leave the tubes alone? Did they do anything with them? Did they remove them?
No, they didn't.
No?
They just left it like it was, because they did an injection of dye.
Right.
And there was no fill on either side.
Okay. And then what about endometriosis? Were there any signs of endometriosis that they saw on the laparoscopy?
Yes.
And,
they did.
Okay.
And they managed to clear
Excellent.
some endometriosis.
Excellent. Did they give you a stage? Did they say it was mild, moderate, severe? Did they say it was stage 1? Did they say it was stage 4?
It was stage 3.
Okay, well, good thing you had that surgery. Were you having symptoms before?
I had a surgery for endometriosis.
Okay. So
it just happened to come back.
Okay. And so my question to you is, how old are you?
34.
34. Okay. And so did your doctor talk to you about doing IVF, and have you done IVF yet?
I haven't yet, but I will have to.
Okay.
In July.
Okay, well, that's very exciting. Have you had your AMH level tested yet?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. So certainly get your AMH level checked, and I think you're doing the right thing at 34 to do IVF. I think that one thing some people do is they don't do enough IVF when they have endometriosis, because we know that endometriosis can affect the egg quality. And so the other thing that I would tell someone who has the diagnosis of endometriosis who is doing IVF is to consider taking supplements like CoQ10. So I have a list of supplements that I give patients that I tell them to take who have endometriosis, and I did an Egg Whisperer show on endometriosis, and if you watch that show, there's one slide and it includes all the supplements that I recommend to people with endometriosis, and I would just go ahead and start them now. You know, this includes a really good prenatal vitamin, acai berry. Also, I would recommend melatonin for endometriosis. And then the other thing that I would consider doing is maybe genetic testing on the embryos. Is that something that's an option for you at the IVF center that you're working with?
Actually, I haven't asked that question yet.
Okay, so I would ask also about supplements. And then the other thing is that we know that endometriosis can also affect the cavity of the uterus or the lining. And so in all the ultrasounds that you've had so far, has anyone talked to you about the shape of your uterus and if there's something called adenomyosis that's present?
And he told me that he cleared that.
Okay, so adenomyosis is a diagnosis that's really hard to clear. It means endometriosis in the walls of the uterus. So unless they cut into your uterus, it's very likely that the adenomyosis is still there. So in my patients, I want them to be very successful with their IVF cycles. I want to transfer and have the transfer take right away. But if there's adenomyosis that's present, that might decrease the implantation rate. So there's a test that you can do that looks at the degree of endometriosis in the lining of your uterus called receptiva. And you can get a histologic score, and that's called the BCL6 level. And that histologic score will then guide you as far as what the right transfer protocol should be for you. And depending on the score, there are medications that you can take that can potentially shrink the adenomyosis so that before you transfer, you're giving yourself the highest chance for future pregnancy. No matter where you live, these kinds of tests can be coordinated. I can coordinate them with you. You can certainly give your doctor this information. And if they have questions, please have your doctor reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to them one-on-one to see how we can get you these tests before you transfer your precious embryos.
All right, because I remember him telling me the under and giving me pockets were not to be closed.
Nisheen, you were just breaking up. What were you mentioning that were closed?
The adenomyotic pockets.
The adenomyotic pockets. I think maybe that there's just a different way of saying things there than here. I don't necessarily think, I would say that as far as pockets being closed, I'm not sure what structure that they're referring to you. So ask them what they meant by that, and I'm happy to receive an email from you. Email at eggwhisperer.com or Dr. Amy or DRAIMEE at draimee.org. Let me know after you talk to the doctor what they meant by the adenomyotic pockets were closed, because that's not necessarily something that I understand, and I certainly want to help you as much as possible and give you the information that you need. So the other thing that I would share with you is that I would say that before you do your IVF cycle, when you have endometriosis, it's good to know, like I said previously to other callers, is what your AMH level is and how many eggs your doctor expects for you, and have a good plan so that you can have the family size that you want. You're young at 34, so it'd be nice to do enough cycles that you have embryos for your future family, so you can have, 2 kids more if you would like. And then the other thing is, make sure you address the fallopian tubes again with your doctor. Ectopic pregnancies. Ectopic pregnancy is a pregnancy where an embryo slips into the fallopian tube. And an ectopic pregnancy is something that can happen when you put an embryo in the uterus. And if the fallopian tube is blocked, that embryo cannot, this is me being a fallopian tube. So here I'll do the uterus too. So let's say I put an embryo in the uterus, that embryo can go into either one of the fallopian tubes. And if the fallopian tube is open, that fallopian tube will push the embryo back into the uterus. But if the fallopian tube is blocked, that embryo might stick inside the fallopian tube and grow there. And so that's a really scary thing, to go through IVF and have an embryo lodged in a fallopian tube. So sometimes if the fallopian tubes are really blocked and really damaged, it may not be a bad idea after you created embryos to really consider maybe occluding or disconnecting your fallopian tubes from the body of the uterus. Because if the tubes aren't helping you and they're just putting you at risk for pregnancy, it may make sense to disconnect them. And then if you choose not to disconnect them, to watch your symptoms in early pregnancy really, really closely. Excuse me. So that if you end up with an ectopic pregnancy, and hopefully you won't, the chance of that happening is 1%. But if you end up with one, you catch it early before it ruptures. Nisheen, do you have any other questions for me or anything that you want to bring up that I didn't bring up so I can help you in the best way possible tonight? Great. Okay, well, I think we just lost, well, it was a wonderful conversation. I'm glad she had a chance to to call in, but I think we had some issues, phone issues, and it happens sometimes. So I want to say thank you, everyone, for joining me on tonight's show. I hope the information you learned today was super helpful. We're going to do another Ask the Egg Whisperer show another time, date to be determined, but I hope you learned a lot. And as always, you can email at eggwhisperer.com, email at eggwhisperer.com, your fertility questions. And if we're doing another show like this, we'll bring you on. Otherwise, you can always set up a consult with me. And remember to check your TUSHY and tell all your friends about the TUSHY method. Go to my website, subscribe to my YouTube, tweet me, Instagram me. I don't even know what I'm saying, and I act like I do. But at the end of the day, I just love talking about fertility, and I want to educate everyone and make sure that everyone gets ahead of infertility so that they can have the family that they've always wanted. Hope you have a great night, and we'll see you soon. Have a good night.